Hey guys, welcome back to another Python tutorial for beginners. In this tutorial, I'll be explaining numbers and strings in Python. So first, let me talk about numeric data types, which are numbers. There are three numeric data types in Python, which are integers, floats, which are floating point real values, and complex numbers. So first, an integer is a number, like it can be negative or positive, and it doesn't have a decimal point. So we can declare a variable called x and assign it the value 10, and that's an integer. And they can also be negative, so it can be negative 10, and we can make it like that, and that's still an integer, so we can print type x and run this program. And see, it returns int, which is short for integer. Next is floating point real values, which is float for short. And these are numbers that have a decimal point at the end, and they can be represented as fractions. So let's declare a variable called y and assign it the value 5.5. They can also be negative, so we can make it negative 5.5. And it can also be 0, and that would still be a float. Even if it has a decimal point, it's a float. So I can print the type of y just to confirm. Let's wait for that to run and see it returned output a float. Next, I'm going to be showing you complex numbers. If you don't have an understanding of what complex numbers are in terms of math, you don't have to understand this. You can skip this part. But if you do know it, I recommend you should just learn it. So we can declare a variable called z, and we can do 5 plus 6j. And j is the imaginary unit in Python. In math, it's I, if you know that already, but in Python, it's j instead of I. That's the only difference. And so you can print the type of z, type z. That's a complex number. All right, now I'm going to show you how to convert between numeric types. We can convert between floats and integers, but we cannot convert from complex numbers to any other type. We can convert from integers and floats to complex numbers, but not from complex numbers. So let's just use the examples I showed you already, x, y, and z. And let's convert x into a float. And to do that, we're going to print float x. And we use the float function, and we put the variable name inside parentheses. And so what this does is it creates a floating point value of the variable x. And so let's do that. And see, to make it a float, it needs to add a decimal point, which in this case is going to add 0 because it didn't have a decimal point first. And so it can't add a different decimal point. You can only keep it the same, and 0.0 keeps it the same, except it adds a decimal at the end. And we can convert from float to integer. So y is a float. Let's make this 5.6. Right? And see, it outputted negative 5. Even though 5.6 rounds, negative 5.6 is closer to negative 6 than negative 5, Python doesn't care about what is the decimal value. It just removes the decimal value, even if it's like negative 5.9, and we change it to an integer. It's still going to output negative 5 because it just removes the decimal value. We could also make a complex number of y. And since there's no imaginary unit, it's 0j. But we cannot convert from complex to a different numeric type. Now I'm going to show you how to get random numbers in Python. The first step is to import a module called random, and I'll be talking about what import does in a later tutorial. To get a random number, we use random.randRange, and the first number we enter in parentheses is the minimum value, and we separate two values using commas, and the first one is the minimum number and the second one is the maximum number. So in this case, we want to get a random value between 1 and 10. So we can run this program and it outputted 9. And we can run it again and most likely it'll return a different one because it's a random number. And see, it outputted 2. Now I'm going to show you different operations you can do with numbers. Most of these are basic operations like addition, subtraction, division, and then I want to show you how to do exponents and remainder, which is also called modulus. And so we can, we don't have to declare variables, but you can do operations on variables and different values. So I'll show you both. So for addition, we can just do print 5 plus 6. For subtraction, let me use some variables. Let's do y minus x. And y is negative 5.9. Let me just change x to a different number, like 3, so it's easier. Print y times x. That's the asterisk is used for multiplication. If you want to do division, I'm going to print, let's do 10 divided by 2. And for that, the forward slash is used. And for exponent, we just use 2 asterisks. For example, if we want to do 2 to the power of 3, we're going to put 2 asterisks and 3. And finally, remainder. It's actually more technically called modulus, but what it does is it just gives you the remainder of a division problem. So we can do 6% 4. And the percent symbol is what's used for modulus. So now let's run this program. And see, 5 plus 6 is 11. Negative 8.9 is what y minus x is. Y times x is this. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And notice it puts a decimal point at the end. And that's because after division, it always returns a float. Even if there's no decimal point, it will always return a float. But you can change the value. Like, for example, we can do this. Print. Let's convert this to an integer. And we already know how to do that. We can just put int. And see, now it gave 5. And 2 to the power of 3 is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. And the remainder of 6 divided by 4 is 2, because 4 goes into 6 once, and there's 2 left after that. All right, now we're done with numbers. Now let's learn about strings. Strings are just like a sequence of characters which are defined by quotation marks. Let's name a variable called first string equals, and these are defined by quotes, which can be double or single. And so let's say this is my first string. And we can also print strings, just like using quotes. And in our first program, we did this. And what is inside the quotes? The quotes represent a string. So hello world is just a string. And we can output the first string as well. So we can do first string. And see, it will print, this is my first string. And these can also be singular quotes. All right, now we can also declare multi-line strings. If your strings are really large, you can use multi-line strings. And so to do that, we need to use 3 quotes on each side. And I actually touched on this in the last tutorial, like when I was talking about multi-line comments. that are strings, multi-line strings that are not assigned to a variable. And so there are 3 strings on each side, at the beginning, at the end, at the end. All right, let's do this. This is a multi-line string. Now let's print the first string. Oh, sorry. Let's do that. This is a multi-line string. Now I'm going to show you different methods you can use with strings. So the first one is indexing and slicing. And indexing is used to get a single character from a string. And the way strings work are like, it's a sequence of characters. And so the index starts at 0. And so let me just show you after I make a new string, x equals string. And so this is actually the 0th index. Even though it's the first character, it's the 0th index. So when you use indexing, if you want to get the first character, you put 0. And so let's print, if you want to get the first character in a string, we're going to put x, and then in square brackets, put the index that you want to get. And since strings start with the 0th index, this is really important, and this is a mistake that many people make. It starts with 0. And some people forget, like when they're new to a language, that it doesn't start with 1, it starts with 0. And this is also the case in most other programming languages. And see, the first character is a capital S, and it printed capital S. We can also do 6. And see, string index out of range. That's because this is the 6th character, but this is at the 5th index. And after that, there's no other character, so there's no index. There's no character at index 6. That's why it returned an error. Now I'm going to show you slicing. And using slicing, we can get a chunk of characters. It's like indexing, but indexing only returns 1 character. In slicing, you can get multiple characters. And so do a string slice. We specify the first index, the starting index. Let's do 1. And then the ending index, which is not included. So it will print the first one, which is t, then 2, then 3. But it won't print the 4th one, which is n, because that's not included. So if this program runs correctly, it will output tri. All right, now that's slicing. Now for indexing, you can also do negative indexing. If you want to get like the last character, for example, you can do -1. The last character in a string is -1 if you use negative indexing. And see, that's G. And see, -1 is G, -2 is N, -3 is I. Let's do -3. And that's I. Now I'm going to show you like how to change the case of a string. This is already in title form, which is the first letter of each word is capital. So let's change this to all lowercase. And to do that, we're going to use x.lower. And that prints the lowercase version of x, which is string all lowercase. And there are also other methods like upper and title. And you can use those and try seeing what the output is. Next, we can get the length of a string using the len function. And so to do this, we type len, and inside the parentheses, we type the name of the variable. And so in this case, we're using x, so let's do that. And x is 6 characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this is an important thing to keep in mind. Even though the last index will be 5 because indexes start from 0, the len returns the amount of characters in a string, which is 6. And I'm going to show you how to remove white space from a string. Let's just like add a tab there. So that's 5 spaces. So we can remove white space, but first I'm going to print this. And see, this is empty, and that's string. These are all just spaces. Now if we want to remove white space, we do x.strip. And what this does is it strips white space from both the left and the right sides. There's no white space on the right side, so it doesn't make a difference right now. See? And now there's no space on the left. And see, look here, up here, there's three different methods, functions for for removing white space. Lstrip removes it only from the left space, and rstrip removes it from the right. I accidentally wrote left here, my bad. Now I'm going to show you replace and split. So if you want to replace one part of a string, use the replace function. Replace, and what character you want to replace is what you enter here. Which, let's replace T. And in parentheses you type that, and then a comma, and then what you want to replace it with. So if you want to do P, if you want to replace T with P, it will change it to spring. Let's print that value. Spring. Now let's do split. And what this does is it creates multiple strings in a list at a particular character. And so it splits the string when an occurrence of a character is there. So we can split it at T, and you'll understand what I mean in a second, in quotes. And T is just a string that is of length 1. So let's split it. And what this does is it creates a string S and ring, and it splits them because this is where T is. And so it creates a string, whatever is to the left of that, and what's to the right of that. And if there are multiple T's, like for example this, then there'll be 3 different strings that it creates. And this is called a list, and I'll be teaching this in a later tutorial. And finally, let's do string concatenation. So we have a string called x equals string. This is my, and let's do y and string. If we want to combine these, all we need to do is print x plus y. And this combines, the plus is used to combine 2 different strings. This is my string. See? It prints it together. And so that's concatenating strings together, which is another word for combining, is pretty simple. But if you want to combine different data types, like numbers for example, let's do y is 6. This is my I am, let's do I am 6. And so there are different ways to combine variables and strings, like numbers and strings and different data types together. But the one that I think is the most efficient and the easiest to use is called F strings. And so what we do there is we type in F, and then we do 2 quotes, and inside the quotes we type whatever we want, like a string. This is a string, and the variable that you want to include in that string goes in curly braces. So if you want to do y, let's do this. We don't need x right now. We can also create variables using F strings. Like for example, z equals f. This is a string. And this is actually really easy to use, and you can also perform calculations in it, like for example 6 plus 5. Oh right, I didn't output z. Print z. This is a string 11. And now there's one other thing I want to show you. To add new lines and new tabs. So to do that, we do \n. That's what it that creates a new line. And so we can do that in 6. And we can actually print this out. X. I am 6, and see it printed 6 in a new line because whatever comes after this \n, it creates a new line. And now we can also create a new tab, which is, I think it's 5 spaces. \tab t. See, it created a new line and then it created a new tab. And that's it for strings and numbers in Python. Thanks for watching, and be sure to comment below if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.